and let's break down this housing shortage. So I found this yesterday, courtesy, I believe, of MSNBC or MSNBC, and it's CNBC, and it's talking about a massive housing shortage and a race to continue to build more homes. And I want to evaluate this, and I have not seen it myself yet, but I wanted to evaluate this because the conversation politically is that we have a massive housing shortage. Now, I'm not really sure that that's true, but I want to see what CNBC is saying about this massive housing shortage, and then I'll give you my comments. Let's get into it, y'all.
The United States isn't building enough homes.
The amount of inventory that we've seen increase has taken the level of existing home inventory to 3.8 months. Normal is 6.
Builders completed over 1.5 million new housing units in the 12-month period that ended in July 2024. That still wasn't enough to end a housing shortage that's a decade in the making.
Not only were we underbuilding for a decade, but then you get to the pandemic and there's this massive rush on housing.
That's making home prices rise fast in many parts of the country.
So if you are waiting for that market to really dip, it's not going to happen. The reason for that is that we are so underbuilt.
Both 2024 presidential candidates have ideas to fix the housing market, but neither stance seems to prioritize a key underlying issue.
A lack of competition is also contributing to the low supply of housing.
Can politicians do anything about the housing shortage? And if so, why haven't they yet? For years, builders in the United States have made fewer homes than the U.S. needs. There are various estimates for the scale of the shortage,
which is estimated anywhere from 2 to 8 million. Some people put it at even 20 million housing units that we are short.
The shortfall in new construction sent home prices trending higher over the past decade. The typical newly built home in the United States cost about $417,000 in June 2024.
That is completely out of the reach of most people. I'll just tell y'all that. Wages have not kept up with the cost of housing and inflation, and it is disrespectful. Personally, before I even look at this, I don't believe that we have a housing shortage. You cannot convince me that we have a housing shortage. I believe that we have an affordability problem. We have an affordability problem on multiple different fronts. First of all, most people don't even want to stay where they were born and raised and where they voted. And so they're trying to migrate over to other places and make that unaffordable instead of dealing with the problems within their own legislative branches that ultimately created the space that made this housing unaffordable in some of these places like California in the first place. So then they turn Austin into California Light, for example. Secondly, in order to try to combat inflation, because now they're saying over the last 2 months, well, inflation is down. Inflation is now only at 2 to 3%. Well, it was at 10% since you've been in president in the office. And overall, over the last 3.5 years, it's up like 23%, which they then raised interest rates in order to try to tamp down inflation, which they then warned you and said that it's going to be some gnashing of teeth and problems and issues. And so then what happens was it made borrowing much more difficult to get as far as for people that was even looking to put down 3.5 to 20% on a home. Well, what did that do? Also, it was a residual effect of the idea that most people that would have normally sold their homes are refusing to sell their homes because they know that if they go and buy another home, that they're going to have to buy that home under the new interest rates instead of the 2 to 3% that they initially signed up for the first place. The problem isn't a housing shortage. The federal government is so wrong. They think that they can fix this by just building more houses, and that's not true. First of all, the houses that they building is trash, all right? So then they going to incentivize builders and continue to put money in their pockets. And then secondly, they don't solve for the fundamental issues of affordability in this country, which also goes along with tariffs and cost of living and logistics and all these things. And there's so many different pieces that move into this that is going to influence squatters, rental rules, renter rights that goes into the cost of housing. We don't have a housing shortage. We have an affordability problem across the board when it comes to wages, interest rates, homes themselves exploding at a crazy rate. What happened during the pandemic where it just basically made housing explode. So then they they somewhat forwarded what was to come early because they basically made money free in order to keep the economy running because of the pandemic. And then people were paying an egregious amount of money over asking price without any kind of inspections. And then it made a whole bunch of people house poor. They moved away from the cities that they were initially in. And then ultimately they had to go back to work. And so now they stuck between a rock and a hard place. And most of them is house poor in the first place. The government should not be in this business. And they think that they are going to build a whole bunch of houses and that's just going to solve all of the problems. It's not. It's absolutely not. And if the average home sold in the United States of America is $400,000 at a 5.5% to 6% interest rate, and most people can't even put up the money in order to even be able to make a down payment of 20%, you're going to be house poor anyway. And you got to pay that for the next 30 years?
Slight decline from 2022, when home prices averaged around
$430,000.
But the typical household only brought in around $75,000 a year in 2022, the most recent year with data available. Purchasing a home in many major U.S. cities would require over $130,000 in household income. Meanwhile, many people have depleted their savings following the pandemic.
We're absolutely seeing a trend of consumers, home buyers, moving from California to the Southwest and Texas, moving from the Northeast to Florida and Georgia because of a lower cost of living, less state tax, better weather. About half of the new home sales in the country are in 10 cities, and that includes 4 cities in Texas. It's much faster to get zoning and entitlement improvement. And so as that happens, then you can move it through the cycle faster.
Decisions from the Federal Reserve can affect the real estate cycle too. About 18 million households were priced out of home ownership between early 2022 and October 2022 as mortgage rates rose, according to the National Association of Home Builders. That economic tightening is slowing down the development of new housing too.
In the housing sector, investment stalled in the second quarter after a strong rise in the first.
There were fewer residential building permits issued and fewer housing projects started in 2024 than there were in 2023.
The expectation, of course, is that the Fed will lower their rates in September. And while mortgage rates don't exactly follow the Fed, they are influenced by what the Fed does. So a lot of summer potential buyers were waiting till fall to see if rates would come down even more.
Some big builders have offered deals on mortgage rates to help home buyers bridge the gap. For example, the home builder D.R. Horton offered some buyers in the Reno, Nevada area a temporary 1-year 3.5% interest rate in 2023 before it rises to market rates over time.
People are going to get absolutely slaughtered, and this is what you call the beginning of what is going to be a manufactured housing crisis. People are going to get absolutely slaughtered. All that is a overglorified arm. That's all it is an overglorified arm. Oh, you get this interest rate at a lower rate, and then over time, we just going to continue to raise the interest rates in order to incentivize and continue to spur the housing market. This is exactly what we started to get when you started to get the housing crisis in the first place. I bet you what's next is they're going to lower the barrier to entry, and you're not going to have to be able to earn as much money in order to get a home. And so then we're going to start to make some modifications. And then it's the same thing. It's the same thing. We already see a housing crash that's coming in Florida. Insurers are pulling out of California and Florida. Interest rates is high as hell. And it's ultimately going to be one of the worst things for you.
5% interest rate in 2023 before it rises to market rates over time.
Most of the big builders have their own mortgage company. It's called a captive mortgage business. They can buy down the mortgage rate. That is an advantage big builders have that private, smaller builders do not have.
There were over 400,000 businesses building homes in the United States in 2023. The industry remains fragmented, but the biggest firms have advantages that are helping them increase their control of numerous local housing markets. Just 10 builders are behind more than half of the new homes in 49 of 50 metro regions in the United States.
You're seeing cities like Tampa as an example, where today the top 10 builders have more than 80% market share. That just makes it very hard for any new builder to get a foothold.
If you look at relevant markets, well-defined for housing, then you see that in many places, it took the two firms that were merging from having 30% each to having 70 or 80 or 90% of the housing market. What's really critical here is the definition of a housing market. No matter how many developers you have building in San Francisco, if you live in the suburbs of DC in Virginia, those developers in San Francisco do not constitute a competitive threat to your market.
Most of these homes that they building is so cookie cutter and they cut so many corners. What I've learned as now becoming a builder over the last year, so now I can consider myself a builder. Not just a real estate investor, not just a real estate holder, but now I can add builder to my resume. I might need to update my LinkedIn profile. But now that I've learned as a builder, man, let me tell you something. They cut so many corners. When you see these mass manufactured homes in these new subdivisions that they basically tearing down all of our forests from, then you see so many different. They'll change the color on the front. They might change the stone a little bit, but all of it is the same and all of it is manufactured, and y'all gonna have to pay these high-ass HOA fees. That's not gonna be conducive for y'all, and it be trash. These homes are built like trash. They got these facades and these fake bricks, and then they go into it, and all of this stuff is bad. I'm telling you, the quality of these homes and how they cut corners is insane. It's absolutely insane. They cut corners on how much insulation that they put in certain places, and they use cheaper materials and thinning and all of this stuff. It's horrible. I'm telling you. I'm not telling y'all don't get a manufactured home or a home that's built by a builder. I'm saying that make sure you do your inspections and make sure you get a good inspector and know what you're getting and know what you're paying for.
The largest 100 home builders in the United States were behind about half of new single-family home sales in 2023, according to researchers at Johns Hopkins.
The top 10 builders combined had 10% market share. Today, only 3 decades later.
Look at that crap. Look at that crap, man. That, honestly, you know what that looked like? What was the name of that movie? Where all of the wives was the same and stuff like that. What do they call those communities? I forgot what they called the name of those communities. The Stepford wives, them Stepford communities. Man, don't you know that when you go into these communities and you get these homes or whatever like that, a lot of times, because you can't separate or differentiate yourself from the rest of the homes because there's nothing unique about them, you cap the amount of money that you can make on those homes. And it's all, of course you got comps, right? But you cap the amount of money that you can make for those homes because they are all cookie cutter and it's a million of them. So why would somebody buy your home when they're basically building a whole bunch more over in the next town over in the next subdivision over that's going to be the same or very similar to the one that you got? People are more incentivized to then just go in and build a whole new home instead of getting one that's unique in a neighborhood that's already established. It's just trash, bro.
Top 10 have 50%
Look at those
market
homes.
share. And Horton, the biggest, has 15% market share.
And they all
So
attached. None of them have no separation between one and the next one. I'd rather live in a smaller, tiny home than live in this manufactured trash.
Concentration has been accelerating. My team estimates that about 2/3, 70% of the unit growth that the big builders are delivering is from acquisitions.
The two biggest home builders in the United States are D.R. Horton and Lennar. Both have outperformed the S&P 500 between August 2014 and August 2024.
Their business is really going gangbusters, and if you look at the stocks, they're way up because they were able to grab such market share. A lot of the small to mid-sized builders just simply couldn't make the math work. Their borrowing costs were so high that a lot of them either went out of business or agreed to be purchased by the larger builders.
At the end of its 2023 fiscal year, D.R. Horton closed about 83,000 homes at an average price of about $382,000.
What I'm going to go over in the next stock club, I'm going to go over D.R. Horton, I'm going to go over to Lennar Homes, I'm going to go over to Pulte, and I want to show y'all we're going to break down everything, the charts. You know how we break it down in stock club, right? Shout out to my bag chasers. I'm going to break down the profit margins, I'm going to break down the borrowing costs, I'm going to break down the debt. I'm going to go into all of that. I don't do that on the Millionaire Morning Show because, I don't have enough time. We usually spend about an hour, 20 minutes going over stocks, breaking down the 8 things that we look for when we look to invest in a company, all of those things. So I'm going to dig into that in the Patreon, but shout out to everybody that's buying a new home and you think that it's a housing shortage. It's not a housing shortage. It's a affordability problem. And they're going to spur the market by having all of these migrants buying these new homes and incentivizing them by giving them free money in order to do so. So that's just my personal opinion anyways. Let me read a few of these.